All right, so we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 14. I want you to notice what it says in verse 33. For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all churches of the saints. Let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but they are commanded to be under obedience, as also saith the law. And if they will learn anything, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is a shame for women to speak in the church. I want to preach tonight about why women are not permitted to speak in church. I want you to notice in verse 33, when it started out, it says, for God is not the author of confusion. And we often use that verse whenever people start talking about confusing things. We're like, man, that's not of God, because that doesn't make any sense at all. And understand, this command about women keeping silence in the churches, while it's not a politically correct thing, it is Bible, and it makes a ton of sense. And I want to talk about why that is today. You know, the church in Corinth, it's known for being a bad church. It had a lot of problems. In fact, when you look at the problems the church in Corinth had, many of those problems are pretty foreign to us. Like, for example, the Lord's Supper. One of the reasons I've never seen a Lord's Supper service be anything like I've seen in here, because Paul dealt with that so clearly. I mean, he nipped that thing so good. I think most people, I'm sure there's exceptions somewhere, they have the Lord's Supper right and they understand to treat it with great care and reverence. But we only know that because Paul called out the junk that was going on in this church. This church had lots of problems going on. And one of the things that was obviously taking place in this church that Paul is addressing is that we've got women speaking in the church, and this was something they need to be called out for. This was a shameful thing. It was something that was not permitted. And again, our world doesn't like that, but the Bible is very clear on this, and it makes sense. And it makes sense. And I want to preach this too, because you know, there's certain ways that we practice certain things at this church in order to help make sure we follow this command. It's something that we've always done. I'll give some examples in a little bit, because in my mind, I've always thought, you know, I could see, for example, in church discipline situations, whenever we've had to deal with things that were very difficult and especially very emotional, you know what we typically do? We typically get the men together. Why? Because, you know, it's an emotional thing. And ladies, bless your hearts, you're emotional, okay? And at the end of the day, you know, it's up to the leadership. And ladies, you're not the leadership in the church. It's the men. So we try to protect them from it. One, because, you know, to protect them, but also two, if things get emotional, the last thing we would want is for women piping up in that situation, because then it's going to be embarrassing. It's going to be embarrassing for your husband. It's going to be embarrassing for us as a church. And so I've never seen anything, you know, of course, I've always been in Baptist churches and normal churches, so I've never seen anything get really out of control. But I could imagine, you know, just because, you know, churches have women and ladies are ladies. You know, it's nothing wrong with you, you know, but again, if we put you in a situation where you do not belong, we shouldn't be surprised if things go bad. And I saw a situation just this week where a church they handled things in a way very differently than we have in this church. And what happened in there, not only was it exactly what I envisioned happening if we did it that way, it was worse than I thought. And I was just like, I'm so glad we have always handled these things a certain way. And it was just a reminder, this is like when God gives some commands, while there are things that we look at in the Bible and it's like, I don't really understand, there are some things that make perfect sense. And what bothers me about this, you know, about women preachers and women keeping silence in the church, it not only is it so clear and just spelled out in the Bible, it makes sense. It shouldn't be hard to understand, yet so many people go against it. So many preachers are afraid to even talk about it. Some preachers almost sound like they apologize when they do bring it up. But it's like, no, there's nothing to be ashamed of. This command makes sense. And ladies, this isn't in fact, ladies, if you find what I'm saying insulting on this, okay, you know, that means there's something very wrong with you. Nothing about what we're going to preach should insult you. Nothing I'm going to say about ladies should insult you. You know what it means? It means you're a normal lady doing what God created you to do. And so understand that, if you are the opposite, well, none of this stuff you're saying about ladies applies to me. Well, then, you might want to check yourself, and you might want to go get a checkup or something like that, or because something's very wrong with you, because women are different by nature. I think we all know that. I understand we live in 2025 America, with 2025, I suppose we're back to knowing what genders are. But either way, some people haven't figured it out, and it really isn't it shouldn't be that difficult. But why is this that so many people just want to disregard this? Especially in America, and I do, because there's only really, I think, one main reason that many false religions, and even Baptists too. Again, we got a Baptist church in Dixon that has a woman preacher. And I think one of the reasons many churches just completely go against what the Bible says right here is because of the fact that they are doing this thing. We know the Bible's good, but they try to fact check the Bible with what is right in modern culture. And that is a very foolish thing to do. We do not check the Bible to see if it lines up with the culture. No, we should check the culture to see if it lines up with the Bible. And we've got a lot of just these pansy, low testosterone pastors that are in this area today that they're just scared of preaching anything controversial. They're always checking the wind on everything. And when something goes against the culture and it's going to rub people the wrong way, they freak out. And they need to just man up and preach what the Bible says, do what the Bible says. Who cares what the culture says? The culture will say this is sexist, but our culture is at odds with the Bible. There's something wrong with our culture. And understand, a good chunk of the world, maybe even most of the world, would agree with what the Bible says. You know why? Because nature agrees with what the Bible says. And most of mankind agrees with what the Bible says because this makes sense. It's kind of like the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments make sense. If we're going to make it as a nation, we should probably have laws against murder. We should probably have laws against stealing. And those laws, they make sense. And so this command about women not being permitted to speak, it also makes perfect sense unless you are a modern day American reality denier. And we got a lot of those people out there. But, for example, too, does anybody, when you look in the Bible, have you ever noticed that all the soldiers are men? Why is that? Have you ever wondered why all the soldiers are men? They were always calling for all the men 20 years and up. Why no ladies? It's that patriarchy, right? Yeah, it's a patriarchy, but it also makes sense, doesn't it? It's also what is right. You say, that doesn't apply. I can fight better than any man. Well, again, something's wrong with you, okay? You shouldn't be able to fight better than any man. There's either something wrong with you or there's something wrong with all the men that are in your life. Because you're not supposed to be stronger than men. That's not right. That's not normal. And so in this church, we clearly understand gender roles. And there is no argument on the facts of what 1 Corinthians 14 says. And you can't try to use some weird context argument because the simple fact is this command makes perfect sense. But let's talk about why that is. And so a few reasons. So one of the reasons women are not permitted to speak, and why this makes sense too, that Paul would say this, because I don't believe Paul's writing under the inspiration of the Holy Ghost. He's not just a sexist. Okay? And let me just say that too, he's not a sexist in a bad way. If understanding gender roles and male authority makes you a sexist, okay, well then I guess we're sexist. All right? But at the same time, there's nothing negative about that. It's called reality. It's called just being normal. And so understand, women usurping, the reason they were commanded to be silent, and notice what it says, let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but they are commanded to be under obedience. That's why they are commanded to be under obedience, as saith also the law. And women usurping authority over man goes against the law of God. It goes against nature. And it goes against mankind. It does. It goes against all of those things. Most of mankind throughout history has had male leadership. Yes, there's exceptions. And you know what? There's exceptions in sorry, pathetic cultures. Without a doubt. You want to see a culture, too, dominated by women? The Hawaiian culture, dominated by women. When we were over in Hawaii, my wife looked up a story about one of their queens that was over everybody there, and how Dole, the banana Dole, when they kind of took over the island, they did it by gunpoint. They were going to shoot the queen, and you know what? She gave him the island. If it had been a man, he'd been like, give me the bullet. But that's what you expect a lady to do. Okay, but you don't expect that of a man. You expect the man to die first. But you know what? And now, it was funny just watching some of the cultural things over there, because they try to honor the culture while, at the same time, they have to acknowledge, but yeah, we did kind of take over these people and we did kind of steal their land, and it wasn't hard because they're run by women. This culture is run by women. And so, yeah, we did. We stole their land. And there's no doubt about it. But, if our culture, if our country ever gets completely taken over by women, somebody else is going to come in and take over this land as well. And it won't be hard for them to do that. And you know what? It's because it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you ladies. It means there's something wrong with the men, that we have let the women take over in the culture. But notice what it says in 1 Timothy 2:9. It says, in like manner also that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with broided hair or gold or pearls or costly array, but which becometh women professing godliness with good works. Let the women learn in silence with all subjection. But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. Pastor Tommy, would you ever preach in a church with a woman pastor? Yes. Anybody want to guess what passage I would preach from? I'm sorry, and I would warn them. Listen, I cannot preach in this church unless you know something very important about me. I'm going to have to preach it. I would probably preach that before the gospel. Maybe, I don't know. But I would have to do that. Folks, it's not right. It's embarrassing when a woman is pastoring a church or even just preaching a sermon in a church. And so it says, for Adam, so why? For Adam was first formed, then Eve. This is before the law. He's going back to the beginning of mankind. God made man first and then Eve. Say, I don't like that reason. We'll take it up with Paul. He's given this as a reason. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression. Notwithstanding, she shall be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, charity, and holiness with sobriety. So understand that God made man first. Eve was the one that was deceived. And ladies, if you want to do God's will, if you want God's protection, you do your role, you serve at home, you obey your husband, you bear children, and God will take care of you. But if you want to go and get on a line, and you want to usurp authority over the man, you want to go and start taking over the church and preaching sermons in church and things like that, God's not going to be pleased with that. It's against nature. It's a shame. It's a shame to the church. It's a shame to your husband. It's a shame to mankind. And when we have women politicians speaking all things, it's embarrassing. When Republicans, supposedly the Christian group, whenever they have their conventions and they have women preachers come in to do the prayers, and women pastors, when Donald Trump got whoever it was, Paul White, he embarrassed our country when he did that. He embarrassed Christians when he did that kind of thing. Oh, these people were elected. Yes, and we embarrassed ourselves when we elected them. It's a humiliating thing. And at least have the decency to be ashamed of it. But unfortunately, we've just let a lot of this stuff be crammed down our throat. And people will say, but you know what, folks? Not that long ago, it was all men in leadership in politics. In most countries, it was like that. And let me tell you, nobody's envying the countries that are being run by women, that are run by more women. They're typically the ones people are escaping. And we need to get back to male leadership. And so understand, according to the Apostle Paul here, women were made for the man, not the other way around. The women were created to be a help meet to the man. They were created to follow. That is your role. It was the woman that was deceived in the garden, not the man. But what people will do, they will often bring up the culture argument. Well, in that day, 2,000 years ago in the first century, It was embarrassing. Paul's talking about the culture of that day, and then they'll bring up some weird historical thing that nobody knows about to make it look like they got some inside information on what the Bible really means by this. But let me just say, the culture argument is correct that yes, in that time, it was embarrassing for a woman to speak culturally. Yes, it is a fact that in America today, most people don't think it, well, a lot of people don't think it's embarrassing. However, it should be embarrassing. It should be a problem. All cultures should be ashamed of it. And the reality is, when we are not ashamed of things that we should be ashamed of, guess what? That is a sign that we are heading for destruction. There are some things that should embarrass us, and when we don't, that's a bad sign. Jeremiah 6:14 says, "They have healed also the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace." Were they ashamed when they had committed abomination? Nay, they were not at all ashamed, neither could they blush. Therefore, they shall fall among them that fall. At the time that I visit them, they shall be cast down, saith the Lord. When God says He's going to visit you in that way, it's not a pleasant thing. This isn't going to, He's not visiting and coming over for coffee. No, I'm coming to judge you. Thus saith the Lord, stand ye in the ways and see, and ask for the old paths, where is the good way, and walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your souls. But they said, we will not walk therein. So I understand that what God was talking about here with Israel. Because of they were doing abominations that should have brought them to shame, and they weren't ashamed. If they would have been ashamed, if they would have been repentant, God could have forgiven them. But they weren't ashamed. Therefore, they're not repenting. And God says, so you know what? I'm going to have to visit. And it's not going to be a pleasant visit. I'm going to visit, and you're going to be punished. You're going to be judged. And guess what? God judged them through the Babylonians shortly after this. So it's a sign of coming destruction when people aren't ashamed of things they should be ashamed of. Our country, many people in our country, have been begging for a woman president for a long time. Thankfully, twice we've shut that down. But you know what? We can elect one if we want. I think it'll be personally a sign of destruction. The more we put them in leadership, the more we celebrate abominations, the more queers we put in office, the more normal it becomes. And you know what? I mean, I'm thankful that a lot of people are still ashamed of that thing. I'm embarrassed by the fact that we've got Pete Buttigieg and guys like him in high office. That is a shameful thing. And you know what? We need to pray that even if we're going to have these people, even if we're going to have the Hillarys and the Kamalas and people like that, that at least our country will have enough decency to be ashamed of it and to be embarrassed by it. And maybe the Lord will show mercy for that remnant of people who are at least ashamed and who are calling out for some kind of revival and trying and speaking against these things. But if we just accept this as a nation, then you know what? God's going to say, you know what? Fine. You all should be humiliated right now, and you're not. I'm going to have to just punish you. Jeremiah 8:11. For they have healed the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. Were they ashamed when they had committed abomination? Nay, they were not at all ashamed, neither could they blush. Therefore shall they fall among them that fall. In the day of their visitation they shall be cast down, saith the Lord. I will surely consume them, saith the Lord. There shall be no grapes on the vine, nor figs on the fig tree, and the leaf shall fade, and the things that I have given them shall pass away from them. So it is true, in America today, if you'll have a lot of bad people saying bad things about you if you follow these passages, and many preachers are ashamed of it. You even listen to them preach about it. You know, ladies, I mean, I think you could speak too, but God said no. Sorry. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not bothered by that. But we don't get to change with the times. We need to show America her shame in this area. And you do. When you talk to somebody, if you're talking to your coworker and he's telling you about their woman pastor, you're like, really? You let a woman preach to you all the time? What in the world? Like, I won't even let my wife nag me. I'm going to let some other woman get up and nag me. In church. What kind of church do you go? You ought to embarrass them. I had a guy one time years ago who I worked with, and it was a Wednesday, and he's like, what are you going to do after work today? I was like, well, I'll be going to church tonight. He was just like, really? You go to church on Wednesday? And I said, yeah, don't you? He's like, well, no, I go to church. Like 3 different times later that day, he came to me, give me excuses for why he doesn't go to church. It was like it convicted him. I just turned it around on him. And I'm not going to be ashamed of things that I know are right. We should make them ashamed. And you do that. I'm not telling you got to be mean. I'm not telling you got to make fun of people. But at least act like what? When you're out knocking doors and people say, we go to church and Mrs. So-and-so is our pastor or whatever. Really? Don't be rude. Don't be ugly. Don't start screaming about Jezebel or something like that. But just act shocked. Have a weird look on your face. And because people should feel, and let me tell you, I believe people naturally do. You have to be desensitized to those things. You have to be trained to not be embarrassed by that kind of thing. And the more people we have giving these people weird looks and acting like they're nuts, the longer we can keep that shame in our country. Help our nation be ashamed of these things. When they tell you, I voted for Kamala, I voted for a woman that said, really? You're okay with the woman being in charge of these things? Don't let them make us feel like the weird ones. They're the weird ones. They're wrong again. They're not right with the Bible. They're not right with history. They're not right with reality. Let's stand against these things. So understand these reasons of women not being permitted to speak. It makes perfect sense. The Bible is very clear on these things, and we don't get to change with the times. But another reason this command makes sense is because we are to handle business in the church decently and in order. Now, look at verse 40 and 1 Corinthians 14. This is where we started, seeing that women are not permitted to speak. Notice what it says, let all things be done decently and in order. Now, are we saying that women aren't capable of handling things decently in order? And let me just say, not some things. There are some things, ladies, you're not built for. Okay? And if something's wrong, if you can. Because you're ladies, there are so many things that ladies can do better than men. But there are some things, ladies, you can't do. Because you're women, you're different. Doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means there's something right with you if you can't do these things. And God never called you to do these things. It doesn't. If you can't do something God never called you to do, there's nothing wrong with you. Do you understand that? When there's a problem is when you can't do something God has called you to do. So ladies don't need to feel it. This is not a put down on women. This is just understanding reality. And so the one thing we must clarify, though, about women keeping silence in the church, because obviously you can go too far with this. For example, notice what it says. Let the women learn in silence with all subjection. But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. So let me ask you this. If a lady sings in church, is she being silent? No. But is she usurping authority? Obviously, no. That she's not. It's usurping authority, that's the problem. And there are many. So the thing is, if we wanted to be if this church was pastored by a single punk, ladies, from the time you walk in this auditorium to the time you walk out, no sound. Bible says silence. And if we have to put a gag on you, we'll put a gag on you. And you all need to submit. Otherwise, you're a Satan-led woman. All right. So just obviously that's ridiculous. Ladies can sing. If I say something funny, you can laugh. Don't laugh too loud. That's not ladylike, right? So but obviously, usurping authority is a problem. And a lady taking a leadership role in the church, guiding other people, I don't even think we ought to let the ladies lead singing or choir. I went to a Baptist church one time, and they had a woman song leader and choir director. And I was just like, it bothered me. I was just a kid, but it bothered me. And I remember thinking about it as a kid, and I'm like, I'm sitting in there, and it was somebody we were related to. He wanted us to go to his church, and we went there. And I just remember sitting there, and I was like, this doesn't seem right, but I kept thinking, well, she's not preaching, but I'm like, there's something wrong with this. And I remember I asked my dad for it. I was like, Dad, that's not right, is it? And he's like, no. Because I couldn't really think of a verse, because I just knew women preachers were wrong. But again, it was a leadership, guiding the men. And that's just, it's shameful. It's a shameful thing when that happens, especially in a church. And so there are many things, again, where women are much better at handling things decently in order, but in areas of leadership, which is what God called men to do. And especially when it comes to difficult and challenging spiritual battles, it's ladies should not be the ones running those things. If they do, it's a shame. Leading in a church, it's a spiritual thing, and it is often a battle. It's often a tough battle. And the Bible uses words like contending and fighting and warring when it talks about these things. And men are supposed to be the warriors, and we would be put to shame if we let the women do this for us. There are some things that it's just going to look bad if we do them. If we have the ladies do them for us. If somebody breaks in our house and you find out the burglar got shot and it was my wife that did it. I mean, hey, job got done, family was safe. But you know what? I should be ashamed of myself. And guess what? Everybody's probably going to make fun of me if they find out too. As they should, because the ladies shouldn't have to do that. If you find out, if some guy comes along and then my wife has to be the one that beats him up rather than me while I sit there and watch and go run away with the kids, that's not right. I should be ashamed of that kind of thing. And understand, there are battles that you got to fight. In church sometimes there's difficult things you have to deal with. And let me tell you something, the ladies shouldn't be the ones doing it. And I'm telling you, I saw a situation in a church where they're dealing with church discipline issues in a situation that was obviously going to get very emotional. And sure enough, in a Baptist church, women kept speaking up. And women are upset and yelling, and it's just like, the amount of cringing that I did while watching this, and it was like a worst nightmare. I'm like, this is what I was always afraid would happen if we handled things a certain way, but this is so much worse than I thought. And it was embarrassing for the church. It was embarrassing. And listen, I'm not even slamming the ladies. I actually knew some of the people in this church. I'm not even really mad at the ladies because in a very emotional situation. I mean, ladies, if I got up here in this church and I started talking trash about your husband, whether it's true or especially if it's false, I mean, are you going to get upset? Okay, some of you ladies, you're quiet ladies. You don't make a lot of noise. But if I just got up and I started just ripping on your husband, okay, you're probably going to get upset. And you know what you might do as a lady who's emotional? You might lose control of your emotions. And you might start yelling at me. How dare you, you brawling woman? Hey, it's a lady. She's emotional. And so if we can avoid putting you in a situation where you're going to be tempted to sin, if we can protect you from that, we should. Because, and understand too, like I said, that's why when it comes to like church discipline things, we don't need to do these things in front of the women and children. And please don't come to me with some Bible story about them, stoning somebody before a whole congregation, okay? Because just understand, okay, we're not talking about like a situation of murder and death penalty. Okay, we're talking about a situation too where somebody said the pastor raised his voice when he didn't. So these are railers. Now, let's say that I did. Me and Brother Chris, we have a disagreement. We're having a conversation, and we're not agreeing with each other, and it gets tense. He's upset. I'm upset. Okay. And then in that conversation that's very tense, we have a major disagreement, and then Brother Chris is like, yeah, I just tried talking with Pastor Tommy about this, and he just got upset and yelled at me. And I'm like, well, you know what? That guy's a railer because I recorded the conversation. Hey, I have never recorded a conversation I've ever had with a church member. And I promise, ladies and gentlemen, if I ever record a conversation with you, you will know it. Okay? Can I just make that commitment right now? There are weirdo pastors out there that are always recording conversations with people in their church. That is so weird. If you really need to do that, do we need to have this conversation? Listen, just get some witnesses. Don't go secretly, but They're there present where they know. Don't go secretly record. People, that is so weird. And you know what? If you do that kind of thing, you're going to have to explain why you're not a cult all the time. It's just, it's so bizarre. But again, folks, if me and Chris have a situation like that, and he says I yelled and I didn't, that's not right. He shouldn't be saying that. But if I go and in church, I call him out as a liar for saying I yelled, and then we throw him out of the church in front of his wife, in front of his kids, what do you think that's going to make how are his wife and kids going to feel about church after that? And he shouldn't have done that. But now we're not just hurting him, we're not just dealing with him, we're hurting his wife and children too at the same time. You know what? Even if he did something really bad that actually is worthy of getting kicked out of church, you know what I don't want to do? I don't want to hurt the wife and kids. So we're going to try to keep these things as contained, as private as we can, because there's no reason to do that and to hurt everybody else. And it would be a very emotional thing. And so obviously Chris is going to want to protect his family from difficult emotional things. And you know what? As a pastor, I do too. Whenever there's a situation we got to deal with people, I don't want to hurt people. Even people you throw out of the church. The goal is not to hurt them. The goal is to help them and to restore them and to do things like that. And it's just absolutely blows my mind. And so, husbands, not only do you need to protect your wives physically, you need to protect them emotionally as much as you can. We see in 1 Peter 3:5, it says, "For after this manner in old time, the holy women also who trusted in God adorned themselves, being in subjection unto their own husbands, even as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters ye are, as long as ye do well, and are not afraid with any amazement. Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife, as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered." And let me tell you, not only are women weaker physically, they're weaker emotionally too. Things can potentially hurt them and bother them emotionally more, and you better believe you ought to protect them from it. My wife, as far as I'm concerned, and I think it's pretty obvious, is as tough as nails. But there are many things that I've shielded her from in the past. There are things sometimes, there was a situation years ago where we had a lady in our church, and she was kind of she was just kind of one of these complaining, pain in the neck types. And I remember one time she got upset with my wife about something that was completely stupid. And if my wife does something wrong and I will let her know, I will correct her in those things. But this was something, it was absolutely ridiculous. I won't even take time to tell the story, but if you heard, it's like, really? She was mad about that? I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to tell her about it because there's nothing to correct. And I knew it would upset her if she knew this person was mad at her about it. And so I just didn't say anything. I protected her from it. I did that. That same lady got mad at another lady in the church one time who was much more sensitive than my wife. And this lady had done absolutely nothing wrong. I mean, it was just, there was nothing to correct. There was nothing to deal with. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to tell this other lady in the church because this lady's the problem. She's always getting upset over dumb stuff. And I knew if I went and told that lady, hey, this woman's upset with you because of this thing that you did, that obviously they meant nothing. They did not mean any harm. It would just upset that person. It would hurt them, and I didn't want to hurt them. So I didn't say anything about it. Now, I eventually told my wife years later when that lady wasn't around anymore. But, my wife, she's gotten even more tough over the years, after having a podcast and getting all kinds of crazy people attacking her. Now, most things just bounce off her, but it hasn't always been that way. And it's okay to do that. Hey, husbands, it's okay to sometimes not tell your wife stuff. Okay? Not because you're trying to hide some kind of sin or something like that. No, it's called protection. There are some things they don't need to know about. I have had, when it comes to, many things in the ministry, there have been, one of the things too, people bring up, or, I think one of the reasons for success with raising my children is because of the fact, one, we've always had a church that I feel like has their backs, but not even just the people here who are cheering for their success, which helps a ton. We've never had our church pitted against our kids and vice versa. That is helpful. In a lot of pastors' homes, that's not the way it is. And I've tried to make sure that never happens in this church. but also even people outside this church, other pastors, other ministries. And there are people out there that I need my children to love and respect because of what they stand for. And there's preachers out there that I know who have made big mistakes towards me and that have done me wrong, and I never told my family about it. You know why? Because I had somebody one time that I needed my wife to respect because what they stand for is good. I think this person was wrong. I think they got out of line. But at the same time, even with what they did that was wrong, I think it came from a place of love. And they sent me a really mean letter. And you know what? I never let my wife see it. I never let her see it. You know why? Because if I'd have seen it, it would have upset her. I got over it. And it upset me a lot. And I got over it, but I was like, I don't know if she'd get over this. So you know what I did? I hid it. And then I found it several years later, and I was like, and by then, everything was fine. This person, we were all good. And you know what I did? I threw away the letter. I said, what all did it say in there? You know what? I don't really remember. I just remember I was like, I can't believe this person's being this mean to me, and it really upset me. But I don't remember the details, and I don't want to remember the details of those things. The Lord has given me the ability to forget a lot of things. As a pastor too, dealing with situations sometimes, people tell me stuff, and my wife is curious, and she figures out what I'm doing and knows who I'm talking to about stuff, and she gets curious. And how many of your wives do that? You get off the phone, what they want, and then you had a 2-hour conversation, and they want you to tell them, and you don't want to repeat all that. But I especially don't when it's something emotional. And then they get upset because you're like, what do they want? Nothing. Really? 2 hours for nothing? And I've had to tell her before, listen, this was a counseling situation. There's absolutely no reason for you to know what this is. Don't ask. And and she gets that. She understands. Moves on. And because sometimes too, knowing certain things, I know she would have a hard time getting over it. I can. So I do. I protect her from those things. And I believe we need it. And that's why we need to be careful about stuff in church. If there's something that the church needs to know about, you know who we go to? The leadership in each home. So I don't go tell the children, you go tell your dad and mom. No, I go to the husbands, and then husbands, it's your job to decide what you want to share with your wife about that. It's your job too, especially if it's something that's like really horrible news that might need to be broke to them because your wife is emotional and sensitive. It's up to you, the one who knows her best, to know how to filter that information to her. It's not up to me to decide how to do that for everybody. And so, again, when I saw this situation, I was like, man, they're marching out wives and children. It's just like, are these people ever going to want to go back to any church after being treated this way? Even if those guys did do, even if that is so bad, it's like, really, just saying he shouted. Wow, that's pretty an easy accusation to get over. I think that's a pretty easy accusation to recover from, even if you did do that kind of thing. But we need to protect the ladies. We're all well aware of the fact that a man is perfectly capable of failing in an emotional situation, and sometimes we fail. And there's been situations in this church where we've dealt with emotional things, and I'm not necessarily proud of how it went. I think you can make a good argument. Maybe we didn't do it exactly right. Maybe we failed a little bit. But let me tell you something. While we might have failed, it was ours to fail. But the ladies, this isn't for them. And you know what? Whenever there's a physical struggle, a man is capable of failing in a physical struggle, but he's less likely than the lady. And either way, it's the battle we've been called to fight. It's the work that we've been called to do. And so if it's going to fail, let it be the people who are called to do it that fail, not somebody who wasn't called to do it. And the ladies weren't called to do these things. It's our battle to win or to lose. And let me tell you, when women get involved in these kind of things, we should be harder on the men who let women lead them than we are on the women who lead. But you can't have a domineering woman without a dominated man. And I'm sick of just pathetic shock jock type preachers that when they're addressing these kind of things, they feel the best way to get the message across is in pure shock jock fashion to just say the most outrageous and extreme things against women. But wait a minute, wait a minute, there's no problem if you have strong men there that are able to handle. Well, that woman's too strong. Well, guess what? My wife is strong. Okay, I get it. My wife, if she was married to most men, she would steamroll them. But let me just say, I can handle it fine. Okay, I'm not trying to act tough or anything like that, but I have no problem handling my wife. And so I get it. There's a lot of weak men out there, and they've done everything they can to get the most non-confrontational type. But personally, I don't know. I like my wife's personality. I'm okay with it, and I can handle it. And you know what? If you have a wife that's got some personality and that has a will and that you don't have to drug up to get her under control, hey, you know what? I personally think you are more likely to have a good, happy, fun marriage if you're tough. But if you're a little pansy, then you know what? You're going to have to regularly go get some therapeutic messages from the shock jock preachers who just don't know how to handle women who have any personality whatsoever. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And so one of the reasons, too, women shouldn't be a part of church discipline situation is, again, we only need the leadership in the home present, but also to protect the women and the children. The children of the people who are being church disciplined and the wife. Often, they might not have even done anything. It was probably just the husband. So let's not punish all of them. And either way, even if he's dead wrong, okay, let him figure out how to break these things to his wife and kids. If we've got to throw somebody out of the church, I don't want to do it in front of their wife and kids. We'll do it with him, and then he can figure out. And it's like if he insists, nope, when you throw me out, I want my wife and kids present. Okay, that's your decision as the leader of the home. We were trying to give you an opportunity to protect them, shield them, or whatever, but this might get ugly. And if you want them to see it, that's your choice. But because we care about them, we're trying to give you a chance to protect them. And it's your decision as a husband on whether or not you're going to let your wife know what's going on in certain situations. But again, if you know something is going to cause a meltdown, you should protect her from it or prepare for it. You should have some tact with your wife. One thing I had to learn when I got married early is when your wife makes a new dish for you that you don't like, don't tell her that day. You know what I learned? When she would make things that weren't good, I would wait until she had made something else that was really good. It's like, oh man, this meal is so good. Next time you go grocery shopping, make sure you get this. Oh, but you know what? You know that other meal you made? You don't get that anymore. I learned that after we were married for a little bit. And I had to explain to my wife one time because she would get so upset when I didn't like food she made. And I told her, I was like, listen, I've never liked this type of food. It's not like, hey, my mom made spaghetti all the time, and I love my mom's spaghetti, but yours, ugh. It's like, no, I don't like spaghetti. So, or lasagna, there was a big, I can eat spaghetti fine, but like lasagna, no. And so don't get insulted. I didn't ask you to make lasagna. And so I don't think there's a cook in the world that can make lasagna that I'm going to want. So just don't take it personal. But either way, I learned just don't do it. Don't do it on that day. Have some tact. And husbands, you know how to break things to your wife. And you ought to do it in a way to protect her. No, I'm a tough husband. I'm just going to tell it like it is. And I'm going to say, woman, this is gross. Make something else right now. And no lip unless you want a fat lip. So no, don't do that. So we can't do enough to honor godly women, to recognize their purpose and value. It's greater than we realize, but when they take over a church, or even when women take over a church service, it not only shames the church, but it shames their husbands as well. Isaiah 3:12 says, as for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, they which lead thee, cause thee to err, and destroy the way of thy paths. Being defeated by a woman is a great shame. We don't have time to go there. In Judges 9, remember Abimelech? He came close to a tower, and a woman threw a piece of millstone down and hit him over the head, and he was ashamed. He's like, thrust me through with the sword so it won't be said a woman killed me. He's embarrassed. But guess what? It didn't work, because when Uriah died, and they told him, it's like, now listen, make sure you tell him Uriah's dead, because if he finds out the battle plan that got Uriah killed, he's going to be angry. And he's going to refer to, remember Abimelech. And so years and years later, they were referring to Abimelech because it's a shameful thing to get beat by a woman. Sisera. What is Sisera known for? He got beat by a woman. And let me tell you, when she beat him up, it wasn't because of her ninja skills. It was because of her female skills. She took care of him. She fed him. She pampered the guy and got him to fall asleep and fought dirty and put a spike through his head. That's how she did it. When Hollywood makes a movie about that, she will use ninja moves on him. She will overpower him, and she will put him to the ground in a chokehold after she does the thing where they wrap their legs around his neck and flip him over like that, kind of a Black Widow type thing, and then she'll put a spike through his head. They're not going to have her cooking for him and doing all that kind of stuff. That doesn't advance feminism and empower women. It's just, absolutely ridiculous the way our world portrays these things. But listen, when women take over a church, or a church, it's a shame. It shames everyone involved. And when that happens, the men are the problem. The men are the problem, not the women. So in this church where it happened, I knew a lot of these people, and a lot of them too were probably, were people who hadn't been part of church a long time, probably not the most mature Christians in the world. So the thing is, it's like that's where leadership has got. You got to know your congregation. And what was so bad about just this horrifying dumpster fire of a service is the pastor who, after he saw what happened, said it was handled masterfully. It's like, what? How was a dumpster fire? And the guy got awarded with an ordination. It was insane. It was such a shameful thing in a Baptist church. And I've learned over the years, most women will do whatever it takes to protect their family. And often the reason some women seem so domineering is because they've had to be very strong and they've had to do many things to be able to take care of things that their husband wouldn't take care of. Most women are not just going to let their kids starve. They're not going to let their kids be provided for. But sometimes you have pathetic, worthless excuses of men who are doing nothing. And then women step up, and then they're strong, they're powerful, they lead, and they do all these things. And then you got a bunch of weirdo men. What's wrong with that woman? How dare she be tough? How dare she be working tough? Oh, how dare her husband let her do these things? How dare he not be the one doing these things? Whenever women take over, it is not a shame for them, it's a shame for the men. The men are the ones that are put to shame when that kind of thing happens. And so that situation, it was always what I imagined. Because I do, as a leader, you got to try to envision things. As husbands, you do the same thing in your home. Hey, if I tell my wife, what do you envision? Do you envision her blowing her top and freaking out? Well, then you need to figure out how to handle that. You need to figure out how to deal with that. And he said, and I'm not saying there's never a situation where there could be situations where you might need to do a church discipline in front of everybody, where everybody might need to be there. I haven't had a situation where we've had to do it that way. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but let me tell you something. As a pastor, if I'm going to do that, okay, if I know my congregation well, I can know if they can handle it or not. And if we have a bunch of women in this church who are not under subjection to their husbands, I probably for sure am not going to want to do it in that situation. And so again, if some church is like convinced that their husbands have control of their wives and all that kind of stuff, and husbands, if you're sure your wife is going to be in control and follow your lead on things, that's fine. Have her there for it. But sometimes you got to protect them. I don't believe we ought to take them out to battle in wars with us. My wife goes with me wherever I go. No, there's some place I'm not going to take my wife because it's not safe. It won't be good for her there. I want to protect her. And sometimes, even in church, things get difficult, things get ugly, and we want to protect the women and children in our church. And you know what? When those times come, that's when leadership steps up. That's when leadership has to do the hard thing. And ladies, if you get left out of some stuff, don't go going all Hillary on us. And when that happens, no, be thankful you don't have to deal with the ugly stuff. Be thankful that you have husbands that are really ready to lead. And you know what? And if your husband, and you're going to get curious. You're going to get curious. What happened? And you know what? If your husband chooses to not tell you for whatever reason, you know what you ought to do? You ought to be like, and maybe get yourself more in control emotionally to where you can handle things, and then you can actually get the juicy news. You know? So just keep that in mind too. So with that, we'll close the word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for your word. And Lord, I do thank you for the ladies of this church. I'm thankful we've never had any issues in this area. We've not had problems like this in our church. I'm thankful for the warnings that we have in scriptures. We're thankful for the commands. But Lord, I pray help our church to just never get infected with just the philosophy and the ways of our modern culture, but help us to stick to what your word says, understanding that while it might not be politically correct, it is correct. It makes perfect sense, and I pray help us as men to do the right thing, to be the ones who lead, and to protect the wonderful women and children that you have given us, and help us to be those strong leaders and examples. In your name we pray. Amen.